Okay, so basically, this is the standard size LT. This is a 124 needle cylinder, but standard size LT150 knitting head. And the little lamb's going to fit right on here. And I'm going to show you that first, how it's really just, there's 3 screws that hold the, oh, actually, before I actually do that, I should show you. So the cylinder rotates and the camshell rotates. So I can take the cylinder out of work. Now nothing rotates. Now the camshell rotates. So I can do the same switch over on the little lamb. So I'm just getting ready to take this larger head off. So I'm just removing these 3 screws. Right, so I took all 3 screws off, and now this whole unit, the cylinder with the needles and the camshell, all lift straight out. Now, I'm showing you this because I'm going to be switching between cylinder rotation and camshell rotation. I'm going to be doing stuff underneath, and you won't be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to show you, this is the drive gear. So these notches right here, they're at 180 degrees. That's how you engage and disengage the camshell. So if I want the camshell to rotate, I engage levers that we call plungers, front and rear. And now with that engaged in the drive gear, the camshell would turn with the drive gear. But when I want the cylinder to rotate, this is a little bit harder to explain. The bottom of the cylinder has what looks like a little flipper, flips in and out. So when I want to allow the cylinder to be engaged with the drive gear, these pins have to be pulled down so that the flipper can flip into the drive gear. And there's 2 of these at 180 degrees. So when I'm pushing up on pins and pulling down on pins from underneath, that's what I'm doing. I'm engaging and disengaging the cylinder. Okay, so now I'm going to take the little lamb that I already have knit in. Just bear with me, please. Whoops. There. It's easier when I'm not demonstrating. All right, so now I can put these 3 screws in. So basically the bottom of this camshell is identical to the bottom of the larger LT150 head. The difference, the main difference is this cannot do 2 feed. You can't rib with it, but you can make not just infant socks, you can make toddler socks, and because I can rotate the cylinder, I can pattern with it. So I don't know if you can see that. That's what we're going to be making, but the theme of today is the pumpkin, actually. So that's what, oops, this way. This is what we're going to be making today. All right, so I'm going to hang my weight from underneath. And I'm going to bring in loose yarn.
Amy, your camera over the machine has moved slightly, so we can't see the cylinder.
You can't see the cylinder.
We see like a corner.
Oh.
It's off center.
No, I don't know.
I saw the whole thing.
It looks fine here too. I think, I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on, but it looks
Okay.
fine.
I see it, yeah.
Oh, all right, good, because I have another screen here that I'm looking at and I can see it. So, but if that happens,
It's better this way. No.
all right, okay. Can you see it over there, Dad?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
It
So,
was sent to the notification.
all right, so I'm going to pull back. All right, so now I'm just going to look around, make sure everything's hitting the way it's supposed to. I had a sock already on there, so I'm going to have like a little area riding up because that's where the toe was on the last sock that I finished. All right. And I'm going to do one more thing. This is our lamb buckle, by the way. This is the our giveaway for the event. And I'm going to just put this underneath so I can hang my weight. Okay, so with the cylinder rotating, I'm going to start introducing the project yarn. Now on the LT150, we have 3 yarn masts. I can have one for waste yarn, and actually I'll show you that. So I'm going to kind of move my camera. I hate doing this because I'm going to have to bring it right back to where I am. But so we usually use one for waste yarn and the other 2 are for project yarns, okay? And most projects, I really just have 2 project yarns going. But for this one, we're gonna have 3. So I'm gonna be using my 3rd waste yarn mast for a project yarn because, hold on, let me get this going. All right. Because I'm going to be using 3 colors, a green for the stem of the pumpkin, an orange for the pumpkin, and the white is going to be the rest of the sock.
Excuse me a minute. Let me speak. This is Amy's dad, and I'm watching on my own computer, and everything is reversed. Amy's using an iPhone to take this video, and she's right-handed, and it's showing a left-handed machine. So if anybody knows a quick and dirty way to switch the iPhone so it's giving you the proper perspective, please put a text up on the screen. I'll be watching the screen. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now I'm going to introduce the project yarn, and I'm going to cut the waste yarn. I'm feeding this yarn in. This is the needle that I'm starting my project, and I typically like to share the project yarn with the waste yarn on the needle in front of that. So now I'm going to pull this out. Oops. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to crank 10 rows because I'm going to do a hung hem to start the sock. So I reset my counter. We have a digital counter. Now, the reason I like to, even though I'm not ribbing, I like to make a sock like this with the cylinder rotating because now when I hang my hem, I can always have the work where I want it. So I'm going to take the weight off. And the reason I'm taking the weight off is because when I lift this now, because this is such a small diameter.
Or I went to the,
What did you do?
I'm trying to look for mirror video. You can mirror the video, what somebody said. Can you see it anymore? No, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Somebody will say where the setting is.
Just leave it.
Okay, continue.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, so I'm going to start hanging my hem, but when I pull up, I'm keeping an eye on this area because this is where the needles have drawn a stitch. And if I pull up near too close to there, the yarn could actually fall off those needles and I could drop the stitches. So sometimes I'll like pull down here while I lift up. So this is, I think, the first stitch that I'm gonna grab, and I'm gonna put that right on my start needle. And then I'm gonna continue as though, you know, there's really no difference yet, really, if I were knitting on, you know, another machine, just hanging down. But I have to hold down in this area because I don't want these stitches to fall off. So I'm just going to push down on the knitting by hand as I rotate. I'm just going to keep going around. Hopefully you guys can all see what I'm doing. So keep looking back to check. I'm just pushing down by hand, rotating a little bit further. It's a little harder to do than on a large machine because, you know, just you're working in a tiny spot. You can make really, really tiny socks if you take every other needle out, by the way. I've used worsted yarn with every other needle out and made little Santa socks. I'll show you guys these actually. I'm not even sure they fit. Anything. All right, coming up by hand. You know, this part's really boring, but it's going to get interesting. So I'm going to rehang my weight. Like 2 stitches.
Hey, can you speak up a little bit because it's hard to hear.
Oh, sure. You know what? I think it's because the microphone's on the Mac and I'm talking into the phone, but the phone's just recording the video. So, all right. So last 2 stitches there. All right. So before I showed you that we have 3 yarn masts, and the reason I showed you that is because now I'm going to take this one of the waste yarn, which I like I mentioned, I hardly ever use 3 project yarns, but for this, since I'm using a green, an orange, and a white, I'm using the project yarn mast. So right now I'm just feeding in some yarn into the project. Because the first thing I'm going to knit, don't forget we're knitting this upside down because we've got the hem done, and whoops, gotta go this way. And now we're going to knit the stem of the pumpkin, and then we're going to knit this part of the pumpkin, the body of the pumpkin, I guess. Okay, so we're going to knit 6 rows. 1, okay, now one thing I forgot to mention is these 2 needles right here. It's probably not very clear to you guys, but we black oxide some needles just because we use the needle itself as a marker sometimes. And because I make my heel on this half of the cylinder, when I go to make my heel, it's going to be on this half of the cylinder. I want the pumpkin to be right above the heel, basically. So these 2 needles that are black oxided that shows me where the middle of the ankle and the back is basically. So I want my pumpkin to start here. So on these 2 needles, this is where I'm going to start the stem. And what I'm going to do is, it's called plaiting in the knitting industry, but I don't know what it's called in hand knitting. There's probably another name for it. So basically I'm feeding this yarn above the white yarn. And when I do that, it's going to draw a stitch with both yarns, but the colored yarn is going to be the most prominent on the outside. And that's what I want. I want to see the green on the outside of the sock. So making sure that the green is feeding in above on just those, visitor is here apparently, on just those 2 needles. So now I'm going to do 3 rows of just feeding into one of the needles, because now I'm doing like just the long stem of the pumpkin. Okay, so making sure that the yarn's feeding above the white yarn. So there's 1. I'm going to do 2, and then 1 last row like that. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce the orange. So now I'm going to do orange, green, orange. And the white's going to feed into all 3 needles. All right, so here's the first of the orange. And here's the green. Go a little bit further. And now I'm going to take this orange and feed it here. There. Okay. So this is the part that we're doing. Sorry. So see how it's orange, green, orange? That's the part we just made. Now, because I'm using all these different colors, notice nothing is twisting. The green and the orange aren't interfering with the white. Well, I'm done with the green, so I'm going to cut that. That in. Now we're going to make the larger part of the pumpkin. So we're going to use 5 needles, 3, 4, 5, making sure that the yarn's feeding in above the white yarn. So we're going to do 3 rows like that. There. I think that's my second row, and here's my last row. Okay, so that's my last row of 5 stitches of orange, and now we're going to do the bottom of the pumpkin with just 3. Oops. There. So now the pumpkin's done. I'm going to cut this. And again, I'm not a hand knitter, so I don't know the best way to tie all those loose ends in. Maybe someone else can show me how to do that. All right, so now I'm going to do 6 rows of just plain white yarn. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so now I'm gonna switch to clamshell mode because I'm gonna make my heel. So I'm pushing on those pins underneath that I showed you earlier. Now my machine's in neutral, and even though I'm cranking, nothing's turning. So I'm gonna engage the clamshell. Now the Little Lamb only has 1 clamshell plunger, where the bigger LT150 heads have 2. And that's, actually the LT150 only had one, I'm sorry, the Tuttle only had one in the front. And when we redesigned the Tuttle and introduced the LT150, we added a second plunger in the rear. And the reason for that was because we added a second yarn feed, and we wanted to be able to balance and drive with more balance, basically. But because it's a small head and I'm only doing single feed, I only need the front camshell plunger. So I'm cranking backwards, and I'm going to stop with the yarn guide right in front. And now I'm going to get ready to make the heel. So raising the back half of the needles. So here's my front half, and here's the back half. I'm leaving one extra needle down on either side for a slightly deeper heel. And from above, I got to make sure I engage my heel spring. All right, so now I'm just gonna break along and make this little tiny heel. Everyone see that? Along, back and forth. And you can see it's starting to ride up a little bit. So I'm going to use my regular old heel forks, and I'm going to reach way up from the inside and pull down. So I just raised that one. I'm going to come around this side. So pretty much no difference, just much tinier scale. Right, on this last pass, I'll raise 2. And sometimes I like to push down. So now I'm done reducing. I'm going to reset the weight. All these needles are open. Right, so now I'm going to lower 1, lower 1. Now I'm going to lower 2 and wrap around. Now this is a small diameter, and if I were to try to do the suicide heel technique, I might actually miss that first needle. So that's why I like to wrap around when I lower 2. I think I moved this in a better spot. Okay. So now I'm just going along, finishing up the heel. One thing about this is when you're making tiny socks like this, you can finish a sock pretty quickly and use up waste yarn, not waste yarn, extra yarn, and make, a complete sock, a tiny sock, but a complete sock pretty quickly and easily. So, all right, so now I finished the heel, and I'm still cranking in reverse or the backwards direction. And I'm just gonna leave it that way because I'm not gonna do any more patterning for the rest of the sock. I'm just gonna crank 20 rows and then start the toe. So I'm just gonna continue, just to keep it simple, I'm just gonna crank backwards. Of course, I forgot to set my timer, my counter. So I'm gonna guess that was about 3 rows. So I'll go to 17. And actually, I don't know what size toddler or infant this particular sock would fit. I haven't had a chance to, I used to have 3 toddlers. I have 3 boys. and they were all, you know, very close in age. So I used to have little feet to test out, but I don't have any nieces or nephews that are really little that I've been able to try out these socks on. So I couldn't tell you what size child this would fit. All right, so we're getting ready to do the toe. I'm raising all 18 needles in the back, keeping 18 needles working in the front. And just moving along. Making a heel just like I would with the standard size LT 150. Move my weight up. There's a tripod really close to the machine, so I have this tiny little space that I'm trying to keep my hand in. Right. All right, so I think I raise this. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and I forgot to raise 2 on the last one, but that's okay. It's all right. Oh, and I must have lost track where I am because now I reduced to 6 needles, and I definitely forgot to raise 1 on one side, or I lost my place somewhere. So I'm just going to pretend that didn't happen. And we're going to say that we're reduced it all the way. And now we're going to get ready to do the increase. So the plating works best when you use a thinner yarn as your regular knitting yarn, and a thicker yarn as the yarn you want to be prominently seen on the outside. So this yarn that I'm knitting with is like a regular fingering weight type yarn. And the yarn that I was using as color, the green and orange, that's Good Karma Farms socks yarn. And their socks yarn is a little thicker than regular sock yarn. So it works really well with that if you're trying to, you know, make something a little bit more prominent on the outside if you're using this plating technique. And actually, I love that those particular colors, the orange and the green. I made a pair, and I just have this little bit left, but I've been able to make, you know, several pairs of socks just using this technique. Right, so my sock is done. So I lowered all the back needles, making sure all the latches are open. And now I'm gonna introduce the waste yarn because the sock's done. Oh, but I gotta have the green yarn set up in that position. So I'm gonna switch that out. Sorry, I know you can't see what I'm doing, but I tried like heck to see if I could have 3 cameras on me at the same time, but I couldn't. Apparently it's not that simple. All right, so here's the waste yarn. Okay, I think it's done. Whoops, the yarn's getting caught on the phone. But other than that. Great, so that's how you make a hung hem sock on